everyone, welcome back. This is Eleni, the Anatomy and Physiology tutor in the NIP program, and today I'm going to be giving you guys a workshop presentation on the structure of the nephron. So if you watch some of my other videos about the renal system anatomy, you would have seen that the kidney has a macrostructure and a microstructure. The macrostructure are the parts of the kidney that we can see, while the microstructure is the part that we cannot see, the nephron. So we're going to go through that in this PowerPoint. Let's first talk about the five main functions of the nephron. The five main functions are reabsorption, which means the nephron is going to reabsorb important fluids back into the bloodstream. Secretion, transportation of molecules out of the blood and into the urine to be exiting out of the body. Filtration, which is the passage of fluid through a membrane via pressure. We'll see that a lot in the glomerular capsule. And also the heart regulates the rate of this filtration by the pressure of the blood through the vessels. So your blood pressure directly impacts how much filtration you're going to be having on your kidneys or in your nephrons. Diffusion, which is the movement of molecules from areas of higher concentration to lower concentration, and then of course osmosis, which is the movement of water from lower to higher. So remember, osmosis is the opposite of diffusion. And to the right, we can just see a very simple picture of the nephron. We can see that filtration occurs up here in the Bowman's capsule, and we can see reabsorption taking place and secretion and excretion. Let's talk about the blood supply to a single nephron. So the whole point of the kidney is to filter your blood. So your nephrons, which are the functional unit of your kidney, needs to be in constant contact with your blood. So you have an afferent arteriole, which transports blood to the glomerulus. So this is oxygenated high waste blood. It's going to transport that to your glomerulus. The efferent arteriole is going to transport the filtered blood exiting the glomerulus. And then the peritubular capillaries, these are going to supply the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule, where reabsorption and secretion are occurring. So remember, reabsorption is when the nephron is going to allow important things to be reabsorbed back into the blood, while secretion is the waste material that was missed in the first few steps, and that's the material we want to go back out of our body into our urine. So we need to have blood supply very accessible to the different parts of our nephrons so this can happen easily. And then the vasa recta is the capillary network that supplies the loop of Henle. So we can see all of these different blood supplies in the picture to the right. See how it's very entangled in the nephron. Sorry, my screen is frozen. Give me just a second. All right, here we go. So now we can officially get into the nephron anatomy. So there are 1 million nephrons in each kidney that are doing the filtration of your blood, and they all have the same components. The renal corpuscle, which is this portion right here, has Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. And then, of course, the tubular system. The tubular system consists of the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting tubule. So all of these tubules are going to be part of the tubular system. And in the picture to the right, we just get a simple layout of what each part is going to be doing. So we can see Bowman's capsule, which has the glomerulus, is going to be responsible for ultrafiltration. The proximal tubule is for selective reabsorption. The loop of Henle is for osmoregulation. The distal tubule is for selective reabsorption, and then the collecting duct is for osmoregulation and water retention. So we can see a lot of repetitive things. We could see selective reabsorption and osmoregulation happens in several different parts of the nephron, where filtration mainly occurs in the glomerulus, which is held in the Bowman's capsule. And this whole unit right here, the glomerulus plus the Bowman's capsule, is called the renal corpuscle. So let's talk about the renal corpuscle. So we have the glomerulus, that is this portion right here. That is the capillary network where the filtration of blood occurs. So once again, the purpose of your nephrons is to be filtering your blood. And so we're going to have an afferent arteriole, which is going to bring the blood in, and then it's going to get filtered right in here, and then it's going to go out the efferent arteriole. So red blood cells, platelets, plasma proteins, and other large substances cannot pass because this filtration membrane it has very small slits in it. So large particles cannot pass through. Now the capsule is what's going to collect the filtrate. So this little um, region right here is what's going to be collecting the filtrate once it gets done going through the glomerulus. Okay. And then of course we can see the proximal convoluted tubule starts right here, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now we're going to talk about the tubular system. So remember, this consists of the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. So we can see here one nephron, and they're blowing up a little portion of the kidney right now, the medulla. This lighter portion would be the cortex, while this darker portion would be the medulla. And the nephron is going to see how it's going to overlap into both sections. So here's the cortex and here's medulla. It's going to kind of have parts in both sections. So the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule is going to be in the cortex, as well as the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule. And the loop of Henle is really what's going into the medulla, as well as the collecting tubule. The proximal convoluted tubule is mainly used for selective reabsorption of glucose, amino acids, electrolytes, and water. Okay, and we can see that right here. So the arrows going out mean that this is what's being reabsorbed back into the blood. Remember, we're going to have these blood vessels surrounding everything. So these are going to go back into the blood. They're being reabsorbed. Now, the secretion here is urea. And then, of course, the proximal convoluted tubule also readjusts your blood pH. As we can see, we have some hydrogen ions going in. So if we have a lot of hydrogen in our blood, we can have that enter into the proximal convoluted tubule and be handled accordingly. And here we can see the various things that are in the filtrate: water, salts, bicarbonate, hydrogen ions, urea, glucose, amino acids, and some drugs. And the color of the arrow, so red would be active transport, so glucose and amino acids, as well as the salts, those are going to be active transport, while the passive transport will be water and bicarbonate, so those don't require any energy to be reabsorbed. And then, of course, the green, that's showing you secretion and active transport. So secretion of the hydrogen ions, as well as some drugs and poisons. Now let's talk about the loop of Henle. There are two parts to the loop of Henle, the descending limb and the ascending limb. They're very easily understood just by their name. So the descending limb is going to be going down and the ascending limb is going to be going up. The descending limb is going to increase in osmolarity and it's permeable to water. So you can see this is where we're going to have a lot of reabsorption of water. To see the water is coming out of the descending limb and is going to be reabsorbed back into the blood. And then the ascending limb is impermeable to water. So you've already reabsorbed your water, so you're not really going to be reabsorbing anymore. And the ascending limb is really mainly just for the reabsorption of sodium and chloride. So the sodium and the chloride ions are going to be going back into your bloodstream, because remember, we have blood vessels surrounding, sorry, I'm a terrible drawer. We have blood vessels all around, so the sodium and the chloride is going to go back into these blood vessels and be reabsorbed. Okay? So let's move on. Oh, and also take note that the blue arrows that go along with the water, that's passive transport, while these green and brown is active transport. Now let's talk about the distal convoluted tubule. This is the area where you'll have the final secretion of drugs and readjustment of your blood pH. There's also receptors in the distal convoluted tubule for the parathyroid hormone and the antidiuretic hormone, as well as aldosterone. Now, I don't know if you remember, but our kidneys are affected by our blood calcium levels. And if our calcium levels are too low, our parathyroid glands are going to release parathyroid hormone, which is going to make sure our kidneys are going to sequester as much calcium as they can to reestablish a balance in our blood. Okay. And then, of course, antidiuretic hormone, the whole purpose of that is to prevent you from urinating. That's really important at night. You don't want to be up all night going to the restroom. And then, of course, aldosterone. Okay, and then finally, the last part of the tubular system is the collecting duct. This has receptors that detect antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone, and it's the final area to regulate blood volume and pressure. Okay, we can see in the right that it also reabsorbs solutes and water from the filtrate. So here's the big picture summary of what's going on in the nephron. Blood will be circulating through our glomerulus. It will come in through the afferent arteriole, be circulated in the glomerulus, and exit the efferent arteriole. The filtrate will then enter the proximal convoluted tubule, where amino acids and glucose and salts and water are going to be reabsorbed. We can see that here. Here's our salts and our water being reabsorbed into the blood. So that's why the arrows are pointing out, because they're going to be reabsorbed into the blood vessels which surround the nephron. And we can see that the hydrogen is going into the nephron, because if our blood pH is too high, we don't want a lot of excess hydrogen ions. So we're going to secrete that. We're going to, it's going to go back into the nephron so it can go into the urine. And the portion right here, the corticomedullary junction, that's the part where the nephron is going to leave the cortex and enter the medulla. So up here is the cortex, and here's the medulla. And then you have your loop of Henle, which, remember, consists of the descending limb, which the whole idea of that is to reabsorb water. So water is going to leave the nephron and be reabsorbed in our blood vessels. And then the ascending loop, that is for the reabsorption of all these ions: sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium, and chlorine. Okay? And then, of course, we have our distal convoluted tubule. That's our last area for drug secretion, as well as pH balance, and we're also going to be reabsorbing some ions in water. And then finally, our collecting duct. We can see just some more of that reabsorption occurring with the ions, and some more secretion of the hydrogen ions as well. So that is that. Thank you for coming. Please go to the NIB Commons and see some more videos on the renal system. Thank you so much.